So, thank you very much for coming. Before I introduce our first guest, I have a little video to play for you that my friend Peter is going to roll.
This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you on May 27, 2024 from the Lebanese town of Bint Jbeil in southern Lebanon, about 4 kilometers from the Israeli border. Behind me is the Salah Gandour Hospital, the main hospital in Bint Jbeil. And the reason why we've come here today is that several hours ago there was a drone strike right at the entrance to the emergency ward of this hospital. It's unclear why this area was targeted. One man was instantly killed. This is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist from Caracas, Venezuela on February 1st, 2026. I arrived here this morning from Bogota. This is the first time I have been in the country since the presidential election of 2024, when I received an invitation and accepted an invitation to act as an election observer. The invitation came from the governing Socialist Party of Venezuela. Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you for Reason to Resist on March 28th, 2026. We are in Minab in Iran. This is the what was described as a girls' school, but as we've learned from our colleague Ali from Press TV, this in fact was a school for both boys and girls. And you can see behind me the remains of the school, and all around me what is quite clearly a schoolyard, which included a soccer pitch, a basketball net, and various images of children and children's art. Hey, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from Chania, Crete in southern Greece on April 3rd, 2026 for Reason to Resist. I arrived here last night in Chania from Athens after having undertaken a long and quite tiring journey from the Strait of Hormuz and the Iranian city on the Strait of Hormuz, Bandar Abbas. Good day, this is Dimitri Lascaris coming to you from the southern Lebanese village of Sagsakia near the Mediterranean coast and just a little bit north of the Lebanese coastal city of Sur. This village today was struck twice by Israeli attacks, airstrikes. The two buildings behind me were the ones that were struck. The building over my right shoulder, at the time it was hit, contained 6 family members. The eldest member of the family, the grandmother, was killed, as was her daughter.
Would you please welcome my fellow Canadian, Dimitri Lascaris. Wow. You're a man in motion there. I wanted to show that. Now, you have to tell everybody where you've just come from now.
First of all, I'm honored and privileged to be here today. I've been to Oslo once before in my life. It was in 2023 when I came as part of the Freedom Flotilla. They began their voyage in Scandinavia and eventually intended to work down to Mediterranean. And who would have known, this was in the summer, just 2 months before the Al-Aqsa flood, that we would be about to witness the horrors that we have seen. So this place, in a strange way, has a special place in my heart. So thank you very much for welcoming me here. I had not seen this video before. I hope that you'll allow me to use it for promotional purposes.
Oh yeah, well, for a small fee.
Happy to pay. So I just came from, I arrived from Beirut in Athens yesterday. I had spent about a week in Lebanon, and we went to Nabatea, Sur, this village that you just saw where the grandmother was killed, Sagsakia. I was there 3 days ago. And The long and the short of it is, and I say this as a lawyer because that is my main profession, it's not journalism, that I believe this genocide has expanded to Lebanon. And what we're witnessing now is an expanding genocide in the region. And there are even elements of genocidal crimes being committed against Iran. For example, the destruction of the water resources of 20,000 people. So as long as Israel is permitted to behave with complete impunity, I think we should anticipate that this genocide will continue to expand.
It was interesting because just before I picked you up at the hotel, I got that message from your Substack about Nabatea. And I wanted to also, I know there's many people here who know you, but there's many people who are meeting you maybe for the first time. Just very briefly before our second guest comes up, can you just give us a little bit of background of your career trajectory?
So I did start my career as a lawyer. I was educated in Canada, and I had a lot of student debt at the time that I graduated from the University of Toronto in the 1990s, and I had an opportunity to work on Wall Street, where the pay was exceptionally good relative to Canadian compensation. So I took the opportunity and I went, and I did manage to pay off my student debt quickly, but it was a soul-crushing experience. And so I left the practice of law for 4 years and eventually decided to come back on the other side, and rather than represent corporations, I represented individuals, union pension funds and individual investors who had been defrauded by large corporations. And so I was a class actions lawyer. This is a type of law where you represent large groups of people at the same time. And I did that until 2016 and decided at that point that I wanted to devote myself to journalism.
I want to, so that we get on with the proceedings, I want to show you a 47-second video by way of introduction of our next guest.
Let me first, since Eve held you to account as the people of Norway for producing Jens Stoltenberg, let me compliment you for producing Glenn Diesen. You know, I can't tell you, I can't. I can't tell you how good he's been, not only for the image of Norway, but for all of Western Europe. The fact that you produced at least one sensible, brave academic on the issue of Ukraine after everybody fell in line to, you know, repeat proxy war propaganda. So, Glenn, thank you for all you do. I know it's not easy in your position, taking the stances you take and bringing the facts that you bring to the public and working very hard to bring. So thank you for all you do. It's great to be here with you.
That was from our arrangement of last year, and I thought that Aaron couldn't have done a better job than I could have to introduce Glenn Diesen. So Glenn, you've had a harrowing time getting here from along the E18, LA6, or how did you get here?
Yeah, highway from Vestfold, so
okay.
Yeah, about a 2-hour drive.
Okay. So I wanted to, when we first started talking about what we might discuss tonight, I gave the warning that since things are changing so rapidly now in the world, that when I sent information about 3 weeks ago, I told both Dimitri and Glenn that by the time June 11th rolls around, we might not know what state the world is in. Things are happening so quickly. So what is going on, first of all, from Glenn? What's going on in Iran right now?
Well, in my opinion, I think Trump got himself stuck. I think he was probably hoping that it would be an easy easy mission. That is, you go in, you take out the leadership in Iran, and then somehow you would be, the government would collapse. The people would celebrate Trump for being liberated. A bit of a replay of what Bush believed in 2003, that it would be greeted with flowers. And I think he also thought that worst case, if it doesn't play out the way he hopes, he can do what he did in Yemen last year, that's just declare victory and then pack up and go home. I think the problem was they bought into their own propaganda to a large extent. That is, what they didn't appreciate was that this was an existential threat for Iran, and for this reason they were willing to absorb a lot more pain than he had expected. But also the fact that the status quo, there's no going back to the old status quo, because I think the main problem now for Trump is that Iranians have lived under these sanctions for 47 years. They lived under perpetual military threat for 47 years. And they don't believe any peace deal that Trump will sign, for good reason. But they also figure out they don't need a peace deal. They can just hold on to the Strait of Hormuz. I think as long as they hold on to the Strait of Hormuz, they can put up that toll booth, which they essentially have already done, and they can condition essentially how much toll it will be based on based on if countries put sanctions on Iran, they can increase the toll. If they host American bases that threaten Iran, they can heighten the toll. So they have all these new tools to essentially rid themselves of the threats and elevate their own security. So I think this is the main problem, why Trump got himself stuck. And also a new lesson for the US in the post-Cold War era is they can't go up that escalation ladder anymore, because the Iranians can follow them all the way, and there's not much you can do. And this is Trump's problem. He thinks if you kill enough Iranians, you bomb enough cities, then somehow they will fall. But they can't. Again, it's an existential threat. If they give in, then they will become a new Libya, a new Syria. And for this reason, they have everything to gain and everything to lose. So they will absorb all the pain, and at some point, the US will exhaust itself. They have to go home. And then, Iran's position in the world changes fundamentally. So, in my opinion, this has been the worst strategic mistake the US has made in its history in terms of warfighting, though.
You've both been to Iran. You were both there simultaneously, I believe, in last year. And most recently, though, Dimitri has been in Iran. I want you both to maybe talk a bit about your experiences, each of you, in Iran. Your experiences will be different because of the nature of what you were doing there. So, Dimitri, when you visit Iran, what do you see on the ground that surprises you? Because, of course, I get the impression that in the West, in the media, from our politicians, that we get a completely erroneous idea of what Iran actually is.
Well, Glenn and I were there together in May of last year, a few weeks before the 12-day war. And we attended a number of important events together, but I also had the opportunity to walk around the city of Tehran by myself, and I spent many long hours in the subway system, on the streets, in different parts of the city, and several things stood out for me immediately when I explored this extraordinarily diverse and ancient city. One thing that stood out for me immediately is that I could see hundreds of women on the streets walking without a hijab, and no one was bothering them. I saw sometimes they were walking alone, sometimes they were in groups, sometimes a woman was with a man without wearing a hijab. I saw young couples on motorcycles. And so this narrative that a woman is placing herself at serious risk of harm if she does not wear a hijab was belied immediately by everything that I saw on the streets. Now, I was told by friends of mine in Tehran that the situation has evolved and it used to be more strict, but for the last several years at least, this has been normal life. And when I went back in March, I then went to other cities. I wasn't just in Tehran, I was in Tabriz, Esfahan, Bushehr, Bandar Abbas, and I saw the same thing. The second thing that stood out for me is I was expecting to see a highly militarized police state based on the narrative that we had been given. I saw almost no police officers with firearms. And I am astounded when I walk around major Western cities at the number of heavily armed police officers I see on a daily basis. I just didn't see that in Iran. And the third thing that stood out for me was I didn't see any homeless people. And this is something that, again, I experienced when I was traveling around Iran in 7 different cities in March. I did not see any homeless people. And when you think about the economic pain that the West has inflicted upon Iran, this is truly remarkable. I'm sure there's a lot of hardship in the country, but nonetheless, they seemed, based on what I was able to observe, to be protecting the most vulnerable members of their society. So those I think were the 3 things that really struck me when I was traveling around the country.
Glenn?
Well, it wasn't a different experience, actually. It was at a similar conference. We went to the same missile and drone exhibit. We went to the nuclear facilities at the same time. But I also thought that the way the women were dressed, I mean, it seems like a weird thing to obsess about. But whenever you want to demonize a country, you have to portray it in a certain way. So I think this is, how often Iran is portrayed. You want to portray it as, the Shia version of the Taliban, essentially, which, just enslaved their women. But then it was strange. It's not just when you went outside around the city that a lot of the women didn't have the hijab on, but also when we were going to walk around, they had some girls from the university who was going to show us around. Again, no chaperone or the things you would assume. Again, I read the same newspapers as you do, and watch the same TV channels, so I had assumed something different. But no, overall, I think it was. It's interesting because when someone wants to manipulate your perceptions, it's quite important to actually go see the people. And this is usually what you do when you want to go to war. You dehumanize the opponent. So again, go visit Iran. Not now, of course, but actually see the people. But that being said, while we went there at the same time, I left before the bombing began, and Dimitri went back, which that's a big difference.
So this event was the tour that you had both there was just prior to the first attack from the U.S. and Israel last year.
Yeah, it was in May of last year, and in June then the attacks began. But if I can add one more thing, I was a bit surprised when I arrived because I was there with not just Dimitri but Max Blumenthal and others, and he brought his daughter, which was like 6 years old. He's Jewish as well, and in the minds, well, what you're told here, you would have thought he would be stoned to death at the airport or something. But it was you could go there. There's a synagogue in the center of Tehran. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no guards required. It's I think. Yeah, they've been portrayed in again, they have their own problems, plenty that can be said about any country, but the way it's portrayed, I think, is very deceiving on purpose.
Max and I separately, not at the same time, visited that synagogue, and in March it was destroyed by Israel. They demolished it, and you don't have to take my word for it. The Israeli military admitted that they destroyed the synagogue, although they claimed that it was a collateral damage. They were trying to kill an IRGC commander in the vicinity. But members of the Jewish community in Tehran went public and bitterly denounced the Israeli government and said that they believed they were being punished for being anti-Zionist.
I want to get back later to how propagandized we are through the media and our politicians. But before that, your most recent trip to Iran, you were a group of a small number of journalists who went to Iran after the war, after the attack, after the war this year had started. How did that come about?
Well, the organizers, what Glenn and I were attending last year was something called the Sobe Media Festival, which, as I understand it, is its purpose is to honor independent journalists from around the world who critique Western imperialism. And they reached out to me, the organizers of this festival, who I think are employees of the state media, in early March, after the bombardment had begun. And they said they were bringing groups of foreign journalists into the country to see what was being done to Iran. And their initial invitation was extended to 20 journalists. And I immediately accepted. For me, it was a no-brainer that I would go and see what was happening because of the historical importance of this conflict. And ultimately, only 2 other Western journalists went on that initial wave. There have been several other waves of journalists that have gone in since then. I was joined by a gentleman by the name of Ahmad Sadaldin, who has his own YouTube channel, and he lives in Florida, but he's of Iraqi origin, and Tim Anderson, a former professor and peace activist from Australia. And it's fair to say, and I get asked about this a lot, that we were guided. They took us to places where there were war crimes had been committed. But the only restriction they placed on what we could videotape was we were not allowed to videotape military facilities. No other restriction, and they didn't do any vetting of my reports. And there were several times during the trip where I went off on my own and was walking around cities. For example, in Boucher, I spent a day walking around the city by myself. So it's fair to say that I think they wanted us to see evidence of war crimes, and that was the main purpose in them bringing us there. But there really was no control other than the ones I've mentioned on what I could say or report.
One of the clips in that video I played before you came up on stage was from the school near Minab, which was reported in here as being a sort of an all-girls school. What was your experience when you went to the ruins of that school?
I need to give a little background to really sort of convey what was that was like. This was the last city we visited. We started in Tabriz in the north, and it was the 7th city. And we went to Minab from Bandar Abbas. We arrived in Bandar Abbas. We put our luggage in our hotel, and we immediately got on a bus, and they took us to Minab, which is about 2 hours away. And on the way to Minab, they stopped to show us a civilian antenna of the state broadcaster that had been demolished. It was just a brief stop. We got on the bus. We were walking around the ruins of this facility, and there was a drone strike nearby. So immediately we got on the bus and we left for Minab. We went to Minab and we spent 3 hours exploring that site, and I'll mention in a moment what I saw, but within 10 minutes of our leaving, there was a drone strike on Minab, and there was nothing there to destroy. They had completely demolished it. And we were driving back to Bandar Abbas from Minab when we learned of this, and they immediately told us to get off the bus and to put all of our electronic devices in a bag and to disperse because they were concerned that they were about to destroy the bus. And I should mention that when we were in Boucher before coming to Bandar Abbas, every site we visited in Boucher was struck after we visited it within a couple of hours. So a lot of people in our entourage suspected that they were, the Israelis and the Americans were monitoring our activities and that they were sending us a warning. In any case, at Minab, it was a former military base, and the Iranians don't pretend otherwise, but we're talking about 20 years ago, it was a former military base. Now, and you could see this clearly, it was, there was a small school, a large schoolyard, a wall all around it with beautiful imagery of children that had been painted on the walls. There were 2 or 3 other buildings at this site that had been demolished, and they allowed us to go in without any restrictions, and we inspected them, and there was absolutely no evidence that any of these buildings served a military purpose. They struck this facility with at least 3 Tomahawk missiles. There were no military facilities nearby. We walked around it as well and tried to see if there might be something there that might have deceived them into thinking that this site had a military purpose. I could see no evidence of that whatsoever. And you can see our reports for yourselves, judge for yourselves. I believe that they did this intentionally on the first day of the war to send a message to the Iranian people that if you do not capitulate, we're going to kill your children. And it's shocking to say that, but then if you think about what we saw in Gaza over the prior 2 years, why would anybody be shocked by this? You know, the mass murder of Palestinian children in Gaza should leave no doubt in anybody's mind that the American government, not the people, the American government is perfectly capable of intentionally targeting children with mass murder. And personally, that's what I believe was likely, that's likely what happened here.
Are you feeling the same as going on in Lebanon now as well?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Why, if they get away with what has happened in Gaza, why wouldn't they expand the genocide? They've suffered absolutely no consequences. Not a single one of these war criminals has been tried, let alone imprisoned. And by the way, it's not just, Gallant and Netanyahu. Biden should be. Why hasn't Biden been indicted by the ICC? Why hasn't Donald Trump been indicted by the ICC? Or Antony Blinken, or Hegseth, or Marco Rubio? Ultimately, this is the head of the snake. And it's outrageous that the Western leaders who are enabling all of these crimes have suffered no consequences whatsoever.
Glenn, you both, with great timing, had a podcast with Dimitri a couple of days ago. And you brought up something in that podcast Dimitri did about not having quite the same opinion as John Mearsheimer about whether the Israeli tail wags the American dog. Do you believe that the United States is ultimately calling the shots here? Because Mearsheimer seems to think, and others seem to believe, that, I don't know how your opinion on this, Glenn, but I remember Noam Chomsky always saying, back in the days when he was cognizant, that he never believed that Israel wagged Israel was not calling the shots. It was the United States, and Israel was useful for them to carry out the projects that they were interested in the Middle East. Can you both comment on this dilemma, or it's not a dilemma, it's just two different points of view of how this is happening?
Well, I'm a bit on the fence, to be honest. I'm not quite sure. I'm probably leaning more towards the Mearsheimer argument, simply because if you have that big Israeli lobby to essentially, buy off all the politicians and influence the political class in such an extent. I mean, if their interests were overlapping completely, that wouldn't be necessary. On the other hand, I guess the counter argument would be that that the U.S. tends to do this. They set up regional proxies, or as Katzenstein wrote in his book, essentially nodes of the U.S. empire, and the Israeli plays a very important role. I think I mentioned in that podcast as well, this is video of Biden in the Senate in the 1980s arguing, if there is no Israel, we should stop apologizing for it. If there was no Israel, we would have to create one, because this is how we project power in the region. So I think they benefit each other to a large extent, but which one is influencing the other? It could be both, but I tend to lean more towards the Mearsheimer view. I know Dimitri takes the opposing view, though.
I used to be of the Mearsheimer school, but over time I've become absolutely convinced that, and with the greatest of respect to all those who disagree, I have much respect for John Mearsheimer, of course, for Glenn, but I don't buy it at all. As Professor Chomsky noted many times, in the aftermath of World War II, U.S. military planners identified West Asia as a source, they put it this way, of stupendous strategic power. And they called it the greatest material prize in human history. And it is. It is not only rich in essential commodities, it is the nexus between Africa, Asia, and Europe. There are two critically important maritime choke points, the Bab el-Mandab Strait and the Strait of Hormuz. So if you dominate this region, you have extraordinary power globally. And Israel was established in the aftermath of the Second World War, in my opinion, because they wanted to put in place what would be effectively a permanent military garrison in the heart of this region. And they chose Palestine in part because it has a Mediterranean coastline. And so it was therefore easier to supply their military garrison by means of maritime transportation. If they had chosen something that was in the interior of West Asia, it would have been much more difficult for them to defend it and supply it. So the Palestinians had the misfortune of being in a strategically advantageous piece of territory within this extremely important region. And I think what happened is that the powers that be at the time decided to exploit the Holocaust and to take advantage of this fringe group, what I believe to have been a fringe group within the Jewish community globally, Zionists, and embraced this narrative that this was the promised land, a land without a people without a land, and it was going to be a sanctuary for the Jewish people after a European-led Holocaust was inflicted upon them. They took that narrative, they ran with it, developed a sort of ideological justification for what they were doing, but at the end of the day, it was just a straight-up land grab. That's all it was, with the broader purpose of controlling the resources of the region and the trade routes of the region. I think the most accurate way to think of Israel is a giant U.S. military base masquerading as a country. That's all it is. And I can't believe for 1 second that this little pipsqueak of a country controls the governments of the West. I just find that utterly implausible, again, with the greatest of respect to those who disagree. I used to believe that myself. But over time, I can't understand how a country, this little military garrison masquerading as a country that is existentially dependent on U.S. support, ends up somehow magically controlling the U.S. government. I don't think that that's an accurate portrayal of what's going on here. There is, I think that the agendas of Israel and the U.S. elites align, but that doesn't mean that the U.S. elites are acting at the behest of Israel.
Does this also go with what's going on in Lebanon? I mean, what do this is the most recent trip you've had? You were there, how many hours ago were you in Lebanon now? You've just come back, basically, through Athens. And the last place you were at was Nabatea. What is going on from a geopolitical point of view or geostrategic point of view with Lebanon? Is it just the south of Lebanon that is part of an expansionist project? And if that falls in line with the United States' wishes as well, what's going on?
They're seeking to snuff out by any and all means possible all resistance to U.S. hegemony in the region. That's what the Palestinian genocide is about. That's what Lebanon is about. That's what the attacks on Yemen are about. That's what the destruction of Syria is about. And that ultimately is what the war on Iran is all about. Any and all groups, states, individuals who oppose U.S. hegemony over West Asia are being systematically exterminated. That's it. That's the goal. And when people say, Donald Trump, I totally agree with your assessment that Trump thought this was going to be easy, it was going to be a cakewalk, but I don't believe that Trump is trying to disengage now. I think that Trump's goal all along has been the destruction of Iran. They want to Libyanize it, Syrianize it. Even if they changed the leadership of Iran, they would still destroy Iran, just as they did in Syria once they put al-Jolani in place, because they don't know that their puppet can remain in power indefinitely. One day, maybe if they put Reza Pahlavi in power in Iran, he'll be overthrown. I don't think he'll be in power anytime ever, but his rule would be very tenuous. And so their goal is to ensure that no matter who is in power in Iran or in Syria or Lebanon, these countries will be incapable of resisting US hegemony. So the goal is the destruction of Iran. And I think that Trump remains as committed to that as he was when he first entered politics. The problem that he has is how to do that without destroying the global economy. That's his quandary.
Glenn?
No, I couldn't agree more. I think, I think this is a commonality of all the wars we're currently in, or all the main conflicts. That is a shift in the world order. That is after World War II. After the Cold War, we had the establishment of this unipolar moment, or hegemonic peace, in which there's one center of power which gets to dominate. I think, what we're seeing now is just the distribution of power having shifted. And for the US, this changes everything. And that's kind of why the current era is so chaotic, because we're currently between two orders. The US and the Europeans, I would add, is still pulling towards the hegemonic, or restoring the hegemonic order, while the I would say the rest of the world are pushing more towards the actual distribution of power, which is multipolar. Now you can then see the significance. This also plays out in the conflict against the Russians and the Chinese. But in the Middle East, Iran is the main opponent. So I don't think there's a good plan for them to rule Iran with a different leader. This is why the regime change. I don't buy that the regime change is possible, because there's no government waiting in the rear, someone to be in place them. Again, to stall the monarchy of the Shah, it can't unite the population. So I think the best they can hope for is to do, again, what they did with Libya or Syria, just make a mess out of it, and then it will be easier to dominate that region. So, and I think for Israel, they're also in a very, difficult position at the moment, because after the Cold War, when you had only one center of power, the United States, this put the Israelis in what seemed like a very favorable position. That is, they no longer had to make any compromises with their neighbors. And this is often, the context, the way I see the clean slate paper. That is, Israel stopped trying to make peace with any of its neighbors. That is, no land for peace, and they essentially embraced hegemony. That is, just to dominate its neighborhood, expand as well the greater Israel, to establish some strategic depth. And again, it makes sense if you have the only global superpower standing behind you, and this superpower will defend you no matter what you do. Why wouldn't you seek peace through dominance? And I think that's what they've been doing for 30 years. The problem now, though, is that era has come to an end. The Americans are getting weaker. The opponents of Israel are getting stronger. The other great powers, be it Russia or China, while they still want good relations with Israel, they don't have the same relationship with them as the Americans. So what does Israel do now? I mean, if I was advising Israel, I would say, if you can make a better deal today than tomorrow, then it's time to shift, accept a new status quo, make peace with your neighbors and the Palestinians. However, there's another option, that is, while the Americans are still dominating in the region, knock out the main rival, which is Iran. And I think that's what they're going for. So they're stuck in very much, I think, in an all or nothing struggle, in which either they can knock out the Iranians, they can dominate the region, or, as they bet everything on this, they can have their own existence threatened, which is why I think they're willing to go to a very great extent in order to prevent defeat there. So it's, whenever you look at this, at the strategic environment, you don't want large powers to be put in a position. I wouldn't put Israel in the category necessarily as a large power, but you don't want large powers put in a position of all or nothing. Either you don't want nuclear power to put in this position either. So I think it's very dangerous, and I don't think it's out of the question that the Israelis could use a nuclear weapon if it's required, if they see the US being defeated. And that's where they're heading now.
I want to come to the Caribbean in a minute, and to Cuba, and to your trip to Venezuela. But when you mention now about the possibility of a nuclear conflict, a nuclear war, what baffles me, I have my own ideas on why it should be this way, but I was not that old in 1962. I was 4 years old. But I do remember in the Cuban Missile Crisis, I know my parents, I mean, I grew up in Hamilton, Ontario, 45, 50 kilometers from the border with New York State. And I remember my parents being upset about this. I remember it being in the media day after day, how close we were to a nuclear war. Of course, what was not reported in the media was that the US had put missiles in Turkey, which were then had to be taken away in order for Khrushchev to take the missiles out of Cuba. But I believe that we're even, in my opinion, closer to a nuclear war now, possibility of it, than we were back in 1962. And I don't see it on the front page of newspapers. I don't see it talked about by politicians. It's just, how is it possible that we're even closer than we were in '62? But it's not a topic that anybody talks about. Do you have any inkling as to why it is this way now?
Well, almost nobody alive today lived through the one and only usage of nuclear weapons, of these weapons of mass destruction. And so almost everybody on Earth has lived in an era where, despite the presence of these existentially dangerous weapons, no one has actually used them. And I think this has engendered a powerful sense of complacency in the population. Even the Cuban Missile Crisis, how many people... you and I are in a minority in that regard. Actually, I wasn't alive during the Cuban Missile Crisis.
Thanks for reminding me.
I was born a few weeks afterwards. But in any case, I think there's a tremendous amount of complacency. There's a lot of disinformation being spread by the corporate media about the extent of the danger. Also, people are very distracted with challenges they're confronting in their own personal lives. It's becoming tougher and tougher for ordinary citizens just to provide the essentials of life to their families in the West. The quality of life is declining for most people, I think. So all of this is coming together to cause most members of our society to neglect this extraordinarily important problem. But I agree with you. I think we are closer to nuclear war than we have ever been.
Since I brought up Cuba, now we will talk about Cuba. But
can I add a quick
thing?
Yeah,
of course, Glenn. Sorry.
No, I was just, since we're on the Cuban Missile Crisis, I had a talk with Jack Matlock about this, because he was actually stationed in Moscow during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he was making the point as well that we were probably closer now than we were back then. And again, he later became the ambassador to the Soviet Union, and on the American side, of course, negotiated an end to the Cold War. But no, he says the same thing. He wasn't referencing the Middle East, though. He was referencing the possibility now of a direct nuclear exchange between NATO and Russia. So when you have the American delegation to Moscow during the Cuban Missile Crisis making this point, we should be worried.
I want to come back to the relationship between what's going on, the war, the U.S.-Israeli war against Iran, and also its connection with the war, the NATO proxy war in Ukraine. But one of the clips I showed was a very brief clip from Dimitri while he had just arrived in Caracas, I believe, from Bogota. And that was only a few weeks, perhaps, after Maduro was kidnapped and brought to the United States. What did you get a feeling of when you were there in Venezuela from the people that you met there about what had happened?
I was surprised, I was disappointed at how little mass opposition there was to what the Americans had done. I had been in the country a few times previously, and I thought that there was much more enthusiasm for Chavismo. But I think over time, that enthusiasm has waned, in part because I think that the project of Chavismo was mismanaged to some degree by Maduro. And I thought there was a lot of fatigue. By the way, one of the reasons why I keep going back to West Asia, and I don't mean any disrespect to our comrades in Latin America, but nowhere on earth do I see the level of resistance to injustice that I see in West Asia. I personally, as horrifying as it is to see what is being done to the peoples there, it is also very inspiring and gives me great hope. I didn't feel that when I was in Venezuela. And over time, at the time I spoke to people who were committed to the project of Chavismo, and they didn't know quite what to make of what had happened. But based on what I've seen transpire since then, I have serious questions in my mind about whether the current lot who are in power had a hand in the removal of Maduro. There's more and more evidence that this government is bending the knee to Washington.
What's the fate of Cuba now that we're in that area?
Well, I think there will probably be the punching bag for the United States once they're defeated in Iran, because the US, I think, will need a victory after this, and I think they're setting up Cuba for this. So they're strangling them at the moment, and I think, a military campaign that is an invasion is quite possible. But again, it's hard to say. They look like they put both Cuba and Greenland on ice while they're focusing on Iran. But if I can just add one thing on Iran, it's, whether or not people, hoping the Americans will succeed or the Iranians, putting all this aside, it is quite remarkable what has been done there, though, because the Chinese, the Russians, they didn't stand up to the US in this way. They never actually fought back in going up the escalation ladder with the United States and also succeeding. This is it is quite extraordinary, because the reason why the US hasn't done more is because the Iranians can mirror everything. You bomb their gas fields or oil fields, they will do the same to the Gulf states. You take out their desalination plants, at least the Iranians have mountains, they can take out the ones in the Gulf states, they go back to being deserts. So there's a lot they can do, even if they, just target their energy. You're going to have all the foreigners leaving. Now, if you're in Qatar, you have 85 to 90% of the population being foreigners leaving. The countries might cease to exist. So the Iranians can go up that escalation ladder with the Americans. There's not much they can do at all. So, and now, of course, when we saw the Iranians extending their deterrence to Lebanon, actually striking Israel for having attacked Lebanon, this changes everything. I mean, yes, the Israelis might still attack Lebanon, and I assume they will, but now the strategic calculation on the Israeli side has shifted. Now they have to worry about all these ballistic missiles being shot out of Iran if they're going to strike Lebanon. So if you read the Israeli media at the moment, they're very concerned. They can't accept a precedent. They can't accept this to be normalized, that now Iran has an extended deterrent, or extending it to Lebanon. So the whole region is changing, and I think that Iran could emerge as a proper world power after this. I mean, if you look at its geography, its resources, its population, it's positioned quite well. Of course, weakened after 47 years of sanctions and containment, but this is essentially the jailbreak, which is why, I mean, even if you hate Iran to your core, you wouldn't have supported this attack on Iran, because now Iran is asserting itself. this is going to be, I know I mentioned it before, but it's going to be a horrible strategic defeat for the Americans.
Since it is such a, is it the fact that it could be a terrible defeat, that the chance of a nuclear weapon coming from Israel is more likely? If there is no real way that the United States and Israel can win a war against Iran, is that what is making the possibility of a nuclear conflict greater?
Well, I don't think they have to win or lose. I think the U.S. would probably prefer to put the whole war against Iran on the slow burner, just have it, gradually extend over the months, if not the years, and bomb them every now, bleed them a little bit, and push towards collapse. We use economic, disrupting society by funding uprisings or insurgencies, or just bombing strategic targets. But I think the Iranians know that this is the main approach for the United States, which is why they now essentially announced they will do asymmetrical retaliation. So you strike one facility in Iran, they will take 2 American bases. So I think this is they won't allow the Americans to essentially make it a smaller war, because the US it doesn't have the resources to do this high intensity war over a prolonged period of time. They spent all of their interceptor missiles, their weaponry. So I think that's what they're competing for at the moment. That is, who can have escalation control. So I don't think the Iranians will let the Americans fight on their terms. That is to decide when the bombing starts, when it stops, how intense it's going to be, what are the acceptable targets. I think all of this is being deprived of them by the Iranians.
I think the greater risk of nuclear war is in Europe, because the Ukrainians, with the assistance of European states, are becoming increasingly effective at striking energy and other infrastructure in Russia. I spoke last week with a friend of mine who lives in Russia, and he told me that in his part of the country, which he has not authorized me to disclose publicly, that they're actually having difficulty getting fuel, and that people are very upset with restrictions on the internet, and people can't understand why the Russian government isn't being more forceful in responding to these attacks, which are clearly being aided and abetted by European governments and the United States. And I think pressure is mounting on the Putin government to strike a European state. Personally, I think that's more likely than not before the end of the year, the way things are going. And then NATO is going to have an extraordinary decision to make. Are we going to, give effect to Article 5 of the NATO treaty? Or are we going to allow the Russians to get away with striking a NATO country in Europe? And my guess is that they're going to prefer the former. They're going to give effect to Article 5. And I'm not an expert in this regard, but I understand all the simulations that have been run by the powers that be have shown that once they start attacking each other, inevitably it's going to escalate to a nuclear war. So I'm more worried about what is happening in Europe from the perspective of nuclear war than what is happening in West Asia.
Certainly, as long as one has someone like Kaja Kallas.
Yeah, well, I think the main threat, though, comes from the tactic, the incrementalism. Because imagine if we would go back to February of 2022, and NATO would have responded by suddenly using long-range missiles, striking into Russia, having drones being launched from NATO territories into Russia. I mean, it would have been, no one could have even thought of it. It would be a declaration of war. So we don't do this. What NATO often does is it does this slow salami tactics, this slow escalation. So they began some tanks, a little bit of HIMARS, some artillery systems, how about some F-16s, and then we're going to do long-range missiles, but we're going to put some limitations. We're not going to strike Russian territory. Well, then we're going to say, well, why not? Why shouldn't Ukraine be allowed to strike Russian territory? So we gradually remove the restrictions, and 4.5 years into this, where are we? Well, we see the war planning being done by American generals in Germany. We know that it's the NATO intelligence services who are picking the targets. It's our satellites which are, directing the drones. We're supplying the weapons, and now, of course, last week with the attacks on St. Petersburg. I mean, how do the Ukrainian drones get to? We see in the video them flying through the Baltic Sea, through the Finnish Gulf, into striking St. Petersburg. So they fly over Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, through the Gulf of Finland, striking St. Petersburg. Either they're being directed through this territory or launched at the territory or from the territory. But either way, they know that we are participating. And we're not even talking proxy war. This is a direct war. We've gone to war with the world's largest nuclear power. And there's no discussion. Why is this a good idea? I was, Friday night, I was actually at the opera in Tbilisi with the former CI director, George Beebe, and he was saying the same. There's no way, it's a weird place to go, but anyways, he was making the point, there's a context. But anyways, he was making the point that, the Europeans are putting themselves in a very dangerous situation because now, the Americans are participating, but it's the Europeans who put themselves on the front line. So essentially, the argument is very simple, similar to what Dimitri said. That is, we escalated to such a point when it's impossible for the Russian government to not retaliate. And this is a NATO attack, and they have to now restore their deterrence, because if you open any Western newspaper, they will say, the Russians don't dare to do anything. They're too deterred. So we can essentially do what we want. So the main threat now for Russia is that they let their deterrent fall. Every time they decided to absorb the pain, every time they decided not to retaliate, all restraint has been interpreted as weakness. And listen to our politicians, that's essentially what they're saying. So what do you do? Well, you have to strike NATO territory. So I would expect as well this year, possibly an attack on Latvia or Estonia. It's not inconceivable. Germany, I'm not talking about leveling the country, but a logistics centers or drone factory, something along these lines. And then, as George Beebe was pointing out, NATO's going to be put in a very awkward situation. It's because either they do nothing and let Article 5 dwindle away, which would open the door for Russia to do whatever it wants, or they engage now in a direct war with Russia. And at which point in time, we can't control the escalation ladder anymore, and we're probably going to go very quickly up to a nuclear exchange. So this is where we are. And you would think in such a situation, you would have media, politicians discussing whether or not, is it a great idea to strike Russia in this way? But we can't. It's considered to be Russian propaganda or talking points. Yeah. So we can't even recognize this basic, have this basic debate.
On the way back from when I picked Dimitri up at the airport and we drove into Oslo, of course, when two Canadians get together, we start talking about Canada, eh? And I haven't lived in Canada for a long time now, and Dimitri splits his time between Montreal and Greece. And I grew up as typical Canadians, being ensconced in American culture. That's why Peter Eisenstein and I can go on about who Peter is from LA, but we have certain cultural references and we can joke with each other along those cultural lines. So Canadians have been at the forefront of, cultural imperialism from the United States. It was quite refreshing coming to Norway and seeing that there seemed to be a buffer against that. The Atlantic Ocean provided a buffer to that, I guess. But I always, when I became politically aware, I suppose, I felt that, I guess Canada is perhaps the 51st state. And now that I'm in Norway for long enough to peel back the onion to see how Norway works, I realized that, well, maybe we're not, because I remember writing an article in Klassekampen back about I interviewed the Canadian foreign minister, and Per M. Johansen, who was the editor or the utenriksredaktør, the foreign editor at that time, put the headline on it, because I was talking about the relationship between the United States and Canada, and his headline was USA's 51st stat, referring to Canada, the United States' 51st state. And I said to Peter, oh, that's kind of unfair. I mean, yes, it's kind of implied in the article, but he said, and this surprised me at this time, this is 1997, he said, don't worry, it's usually Norway that's called the USA's 51st stat. So what's the vassal status now with Norway and NATO and US influence and the nuclear and we have military bases, which we don't know what's going on in them. So I know, Glenn, you can't comment on Canada, and Dimitri, you can't comment on Norway, but I would like you to give us an update on the current vassal status of both Norway and Canada vis-a-vis the United States.
Well, we don't have military bases. We call it omforente områder.
What does that mean?
It's an agreed area because, well, we don't agree foreign military bases on our soil,
right.
So we simply call it something else. But it's military bases. So
it's very Norwegian.
Yeah, if you can't argue for something, just develop a new concept. But I think the country changed a lot. I always make the point that during the Cold War, well, if your country, you want security, you always have to balance deterrence with reassurance. And when you had a balance of power during the Cold War, Norway, you know, it was a NATO country, which was, you know, what would deter the Soviets. But at the same time, they wanted to balance this with reassurance. So they made sure that there would be no bases in Norway. There would be no too much American or British activity up in the high north, where we had a border with the Soviets. Well, we still do with the Russians. And this was, we became NATO light. Something, you know, deterrence without provoking the Soviets. But these days, if you would say, well, how do we deter without provoking? You can't even make this argument because nothing we can ever do is provocative. And I think this, you know, this is what was a product of the unipolar moment after the Cold War. That is, there was no point anymore to reassure the neighbor, because in a unipolar moment, security is not, it doesn't require you to reassure other great powers, because there are no other great powers. Hegemonic peace means you dominate to such an extent that it doesn't matter what your opponents think, because there's nothing they can do. They will have to adjust to this. And I think this changed the country as well. So we don't talk about reassurance anymore. It's just max deterrence. So what does that translate into policy? Well, now we're going to have American bases, or omforente områder. We don't care anymore in the northern regions if we provoke the Russians. Again, Sweden and Finland joining NATO was celebrated as, aha, you know, Putin wanted less NATO, now he has got more. No one questions how does that affect our security, because they will, of course, have to respond in kind. No, I think all of this is making us more insecure, which makes us more dependent on the United States. Now, the big irony, of course, is we're doing all of this at the time when the US is in relative decline. You have a multipolar world emerging, and I always make the point that they have to readjust in a multipolar world. You can't be everywhere. So at the moment, the Americans will start to pull away. And I think this is common sense. If they thought they could be everywhere at once, I think the lesson in Iran proves they can't, because First, they sent all their weapons to Ukraine. Then they wanted to fight Iran. Then they realized there's not enough weapons, so they started to pull them out of Europe, pull them out of East Asia. No one trusts the Americans anymore. The East Asians, the Gulf states, the Europeans, the Ukrainians all feel betrayed. So sooner or later, the Americans will have to choose what territories will you protect. Where is your priority? And I think they will go with the Western Hemisphere and East Asia. So the Americans will begin to pivot away from Europe, as early as Obama indicated that the US would do, that is pivot to Asia. And at this point in time, the Europeans don't have any other plans, so they want to increase their own market value with the Americans by essentially, signing any peace agreement, any trade agreement, hosting any bases, hoping to elevate our own role or value to the United States. And of course, if we can pick a fight with the Russians, then the liberal democratic West will unify against the authoritarian East. This is the idea, but none of this will work because for the Americans, staying in Europe will consume too many resources and it will push the Russians closer to the Chinese, which are their main peer competitor. So I think, this is the direction we're going. The Europeans are picking a fight with Russia at the same time as the Americans are leaving the continent and essentially outsourcing the war to us. So much like Dimitri said, he doesn't think the Americans want to finish the war with Iran. I don't think they want to finish the war against Russia either. I think they just want to put the Europeans on the front line. So we've made ourselves a vassal in every way. And at some point we should learn the same lesson as the Gulf states are currently learning. That is, in the 1990s, if you link yourself to the hegemon, the United States, your security will be absolute. But in an era of a declining hegemon, the hegemon will use its frontline states to weaken adversaries, and then, as they all have a target on their back, the US can leave.
Yep.
And that's where we are. So it's a very exposed vassal as well.
So maybe Canada is a little safer.
Well, with Donald Trump in power, I'm not so sure.
No, talk about Canada. We have to talk about Canada, just please.
Yeah. Before I do, I'd like to ask a question to the audience.
Yeah.
How many of you have a favorable opinion of Canada? Please raise your hand. I would say it's less than a majority. How many of you have an unfavorable view of Canada? Ooh, it looks like the favorables are more numerous than the unfavorables. I have a very unfavorable view of Canada. I've spent much too long in that country. It's just some basic facts about Canada which would inform people's thinking about, how Canadians think. Canada shares a border with only one country, and that's the United States. It is separated from the rest of the world by vast oceans, and this poses practical impediments for many Canadians. They can't afford to travel frequently to places other than the United States. And when they do, they overwhelmingly go to Europe. They hardly ever have any contact with the non-Western world in any meaningful sense. Secondly, 90% of the Canadian population lives within 100 kilometers or so of the United States border. And our media is essentially American media. We really don't have any truly Canadian media anymore. I'm not sure that we ever did. Canada is the largest trading partner of the United States. The United States is by far our largest trading partner. We supply enormous amounts of commodities, including oil, to the United States. We are in NORAD, the North, this air defense system with the United States. We're in NATO. We're in the Five Eyes intelligence system, this white supremacist intelligence organization. Canada is in every conceivable sense the 51st state of the United States already. It's just the reality. The only thing that really at this stage distinguishes us, and this distinction is being eroded, is our national healthcare system. The one major distinction is that we have a national healthcare system, but it's being increasingly eroded and privatized by the government. So even that's going to be lost soon. And it really bothers me. The reason why I asked you this question is because Canada has somehow deceived people around the world, particularly in Europe, into thinking that it's a good actor, that it is a positive force in the world. And so Canada exploits this to legitimize US wars of aggression. So for example, Mark Carney, who is right now wildly popular in Canada for some insane reason, came right out of the gate and was praising the war of aggression on Iran without any qualification and placing all the responsibility for this war on Iran. And, has repeatedly said Iran can't have a nuclear weapon without ever saying anything about the fact that Israel has nuclear weapons and is not a member of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. I could go on and on. So Canada is actually a very nefarious actor in this world. And I know there's been a lot of chatter in recent months about Canada becoming a member of the EU. I don't think you want to have Canada as a member of the EU. And for our sake as well, please, reject this whole idea of Canada becoming integrated in the EU.
Yes, well, I have to concur with my Canadian colleague here, although Norway has pretty good PR out to the rest of the world too. If I ask people outside of Norway, like Canadians, what do they think of Norway? Oh, Norway. They're shit at ice hockey, but otherwise, Norway is really good. And now we can't even say that anymore because Norway beat Canada in the bronze medal match in the ice hockey VM. So we let's face it, Norway and Canada have a lot in common, for both for good and bad reasons, I think. But yeah, and what do you call Mark Carney, Prime Minister?
Goldman Sachs.
Thank you. Okay, we are going to have a short break of about. That's a. Nei, vi skal ha kort pause. 10 minutter. Slik at vi kan ta litt vann, kanskje snakke litt. Og etterpå skal vi ha spørsmål- og svarsesjon. Så 10 minutter, vi er tilbake her, og da kan dere stille spørsmål til Glenn og Dimitri. Okay, jeg skal styre. Okay, yeah, vær så god.
My question is, how do you view the role of Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates right now?
Hvem har spørsmål til?
Both of you guests.
Okay.
Yeah.
Erdogan just came out and said, interestingly, after Iran attacked Israel for its brutalization of Lebanon and its attack on Beirut, he came out and he said that, we are the protector. We will protect the Lebanese, we will protect the Syrians, this is the hinterland of Turkey. But at the end of the day, what is he actually doing to defend the Lebanese? Has he put at risk any military assets? Has he imposed meaningful sanctions on Israel? Has he distanced himself from the United States or NATO? No, this is all rhetoric. And I think to an even greater degree, the United Arab Emirates. What was the third country that you mentioned? Saudi Arabia, yes. These are extraordinarily wealthy, vicious, anti-democratic autocrats who have repeatedly betrayed the Palestinian people. They have seen in horrifying reality that the United States and Israel will murder any leader in West Asia who opposes U.S. hegemony and will probably kill their family members too. So I'm extremely skeptical. I hope that I'm wrong, but I'm extremely skeptical that any of these vassals of Washington are ultimately going to expel U.S. military forces from their region or take a stand for the Palestinians, side with justice. I think what we need to see in West Asia is regime change. And a good place to start would be the United Arab Emirates and Bahrain. That might get the ball rolling. But until then, I'm very skeptical.
Yeah, well, I think the war with Iran has changed some of the dynamic, though, because I don't think it's an accident that Erdogan is stepping on his rhetoric. Now, I'm not disagreeing. I think very much that it is limited to rhetoric, but the fact that the Iranians have essentially taken leadership in terms of opposing the U.S., Israel, and also standing up for the Palestinians and the Lebanese, I think this is putting Turkey in a very awkward position. So, Erdogan still has to listen to his population, and there's a lot of them who are also concerned why is it only rhetorical? Why do we continue to ship the oil? Why, So I think for this reason, it's mounting pressure on a lot of countries in the region to essentially change their posture. So I think the challenge can be seen as many levels. So again, coming from the populations, I think in Bahrain, I think this if you want a regime change, I think this is the ultimate, the ideal place to have it, because they're running. This dictatorship is not going to last. Every time they get into trouble, the Saudis have to come in and assist. But also the UAE, I think they've put themselves on the main state now, on the front line. That is, they have some benefits. I think they hope to see some of their old islands back. But overall, I think if the United States or Israel attacks the gas fields in Iran, I think UAE will be the first one to go. So. If they have to burn off the energy facilities in one of the Gulf states, I think the Iranians would probably go after UAE as the main opponent. Mm-hmm. So I don't know. I think the situation is very dangerous and unstable.
Yep. Yes, sir. Varsågod.
One question to the guys about the economy, about the money around these wars, and also a little bit about the Samson doctrine in Israel. If you can speak a little bit about this, please. I see now that Mr. Diesen had already started to talk about a little bit about areas and maybe some business, but the economy and the Samson doctrine. Thank you.
You want me to start?
Yeah, go.
I'm glad you asked this question. It's very relevant to the whole question of whether Israel controls the U.S. government or the U.S. government controls Israel. Everybody talks about the power of the Zionist lobby. I think the Zionist lobby is a pipsqueak compared to the military-industrial complex. The weapons industry and all of the whole ecosystem of arms manufacturing, intelligence, so forth in the United States makes fabulous amounts of money from these wars. They are profiting like pirates off of these wars. And, it behooves us to remember what Eisenhower said as he left office in 1961. He warned the American people about the rise of the military-industrial complex, and with good reason. And ultimately, they succeeded in subverting what there was of democracy in the United States, and this cancer has now spread throughout the West. And you're seeing this in the decision of Western leaders without any meaningful public debate to raise their military spending to 5% of GDP. This is an expression of the degree to which the military-industrial complex has seized the power of government throughout the West. So to me, that is the number one driver of this war, is the weapons industry and the military-industrial complex. They love these wars in West Asia. And of course, there's the oil. And if you can control the oil and other commodities that are coming out of the Gulf, you could put a country like China, the main rival of the United States, in a very difficult position. So to me, this is what's really driving it. It's the economy. It's the power that comes from the control of these resources. It's not some ideology called Zionism that's driving these wars.
No, nothing to it.
Yep, I did.
He's asking about the Samson doctrine.
You want to take that on?
No, you're good.
As I understand the Samson doctrine, it's that Israel will resort to any and all means at its disposal, including nuclear weapons, if it feels its existence. Was that what you're referring to?
It's like
The which?
it's like a rat in the corner. When the rat is in the corner, what they do,
I'm not sure.
The willingness to self-destruct if you're put in a corner. Like Samson did, he tore down the wall.
Then he just tore down everything to realize that if you're locked in and there's nowhere to go, you'll just take everybody with you.
Okay, but aren't we talking about the same thing? If Israel feels cornered, it will blow up the Middle East with nukes?
What they will do? Talk about what is the Samson doctrine?
Yeah, I profess that I'm not entirely sure. I don't know that I'm the right person to ask that question to. My understanding of the Samson Doctrine, and I could be completely wrong, is that if Israel feels it's cornered, it will resort to nuclear weapons. But I may not understand it properly.
Okay. I would just want, you brought up Eisenhower's speech about the military-industrial complex, lest we forget that it was under Eisenhower that the CIA took out Mossadegh in Iran. I think we'll come up here, but first Henning has somebody back there, but I've seen both of you.
Good afternoon. I just wondering because in the 2000s when the social media started, it seems like we have a kind of control over it. The people, it was like working for us. But right now, it's the social media is completely propaganda. It works with artificial intelligence. It makes closed loops. So when you look at the mobile, it's just showing what you want, but not to other people. So you don't have the impressions that what you're saying has some repercussion, but not at all. So, and this is also making in Europe an increase in right-wing in the young people, very strong, racism, and a lot of weird stuff, like hate to Muslims. I see the social media is playing a very weird role in kind of modern propaganda. And in this war, I see as well like the social media is also playing very strong roles to keep the people kind of at bay about meaning and stuff. Any meanings about it?
Glenn, you want to?
About the role of social media in the propaganda. Well, I think it's already done enough research on it showing how they use the algorithms. I think it's become a key component of the propaganda wars. There's a reason why the United States wanted to take over TikTok. That is, the Israelis also saw it as exposing a lot of war crimes in Gaza. So, and it showed that this, put it outside the narrative control. During wars, you want to control the narratives. When a large part of the population gets information from social media, and you can no longer control the narrative, people trust the traditional media less and less, then you want to seize control of the social media as well. I think for the United States, it seemed unproblematic for a while, but then of course they have their own polarization within. So now you see them using essentially the media platforms against each other. We already learned this from Zuckerberg. He confirmed, under the Biden administration and the Trump administration, for that matter, how they were, censoring certain information, not just about COVID, but also they censored information about Hunter Biden, and later on they admitted the intelligence services asked us to do it, so we did it. Same as Twitter. This was one of the reasons why Elon Musk wanted to take it over, not necessarily to make it less or more open. That is, if you tweet, Palestine from river to the sea, you'll get banned for promoting genocide against Israelis. So, there's some things you can't say, but they just shifted it from being a Democratic platform to a Republican. So they use the platforms against each other as well. So no, I think it's going to be, the propaganda is very much organized around who controls the social media platforms.
Okay. Yes.
Thank you. I have a question for both of you, and it regards, there are two separate studies that say, one from Peter Turchin in his American Russian, and one from Warwick Powell, I think he's Australian British, which they both say that Ukraine, the front line in Ukraine, can collapse already in July. That means, what then? What then?
Mm-hmm. I'm going to let you go first on this.
Well, it's quite possible. I mean, whenever you see the media, and I know that now in the media we're having a new cycle where for a long time, for 4 years, they were saying Ukraine's winning, and then of course they had to accept, well, they're not really, things are going very poorly, but now again we're going back to the narrative. Well, they're really winning yet again, but if they were, why would the European politicians be talking about deporting millions of Ukrainian refugees to fill the trenches? It does make sense. Economically, they're still struggling, politically, socially. For anyone following Ukrainian Telegram channels, the resentment now towards what they call military recruiters is only growing. But the key problems is the manpower, which is declining, and it's air defense. This just gets worse and worse every day. And I think this is quite deceptive, the way war is portrayed in the media, because the media only focuses on how much the front lines have been moving. But this is a war of attrition, and a war of attrition, it doesn't necessarily make sense to storm as much territory as possible if you can't hold that territory. If you attack well-defended territories, you waste a lot of resources, manpower, military equipment. Usually what you expect to see in a war of attrition is each side just pounding the hell out of the other guy, and whoever's bled white first loses. And once the collapse comes, that's when you seize the territory you want. Which is why I'm saying, if one really wants to call oneself a friend of Ukraine or wishing the best for Ukraine, why would you go this extra mile now, waste hundreds of thousands of more troops, the last ones they have, and then once they collapse, they're going to lose not just all this manpower, they're going to lose huge amount of territory. Because at the same time, the Europeans especially are telling the Russians very clearly, when this war is over, we're going to send our troops in, we're going to have our weapons there, we're going to pump them full of weapons. It sounds patriotic, sounds very pro-Ukrainian, as we like to say, but what message does that send to Moscow? What we're saying is, whatever territory you don't snatch now, it's going to end up in the hands of us, of NATO. So I think if the front lines collapse over the summer, or even in autumn, I think the Russians will take at least Kharkov, Dnipro, Nikolaev, and Odessa, which will make Ukraine a landlocked country, very dysfunctional, much of its population having left already, and the infrastructure being destroyed. It's going to be, and also you would give the Russians the incentive to make it very, very dysfunctional, because you don't want a functional Ukraine, which can be used as a NATO front line. So we're sending all the wrong messages and giving all the wrong incentives. If one really wanted a stable Ukraine, and I think in the long run that's something the Russians will benefit from as well, come to an agreement. And the source of this conflict has been the failure to establish a mutually acceptable European security architecture after the Cold War. I mean, I know you're not allowed to say it in this country, but really, what was the assumption that what would a stable Europe look like? How would we organize security? So far, the only answer which is acceptable is, well, let's make NATO as powerful as possible, expand it ever closer to Russian borders, and have peace through strength, which means we'll be so powerful the Russians have to do what we tell them. A hegemonic peace. It's a recipe for disaster. And the Ukrainians are paying the price. And I'm not sure if the fronts will collapse this summer, but I think from what I'm seeing or hearing, the Russians are preparing for a massive offensive, not just in Kharkov, Sumy, but also in the Zaporizhia region. And they might be able to take Donetsk as well. So no, it could be a very messy summer.
I'm sorry, I should have said it better, but my question was really regarding the war in Europe, on how will the European react to a Russian victory?
Well, I think poorly. It's possible that the French and British at least will try to send some troops to Odessa. Well, there's no good plan A, there's no good plan B. I think, they possibly escalate them, and this is what we've seen all along. There's a reason why, not just they're talking now about deporting all of these Ukrainian refugees to go, fight for Zelensky and NATO. I think also you see it by the willingness to use NATO territories to attack Russia. This also demonstrates the desperation growing. And this is a problem for the Europeans as well. The EU leaders especially tend to see this conflict as all or nothing. That is, if they're able to defeat the Russians, they would have their cheap energy back. The Americans would come back to Europe. We would have our own unipolar moment again. We would have the 1990s. If the Europeans are defeated, as you hear European leaders say as well, the Americans will definitely pack up. They will leave. Europe won't even be a pole of power in the multipolar world. So this is very dangerous. I always make the point that whenever powers see everything or nothing, they will take great risks and do very foolish things. So I expect the Europeans to do something very foolish. And that could be war with Russia. It could simply be sending troops to Odessa, hoping that they won't get killed, but they will. So I don't know. I think it's going to be very unstable, very dangerous, if it collapses, that is.
I agree with Glenn's assessment. I mean, I think the likely response, even if the front line collapses and Russia takes all of those cities that Glenn mentioned, Europe can sustain this, this war simply by continuing to produce massive amounts of drones and continuing to train Ukrainians. You don't need to have hundreds of thousands of drone operators in order to continue to inflict punishment on Russia and pain on Russia. And I think that that's probably what they're going to do at a bare minimum. They might introduce their own forces, but they'll continue to try to harass and damage Russia's economy, kill Russian soldiers with drone warfare, even if they lose huge swaths of territory in the summer. So ultimately, it's going to require intervention by people in the street in Europe to put a stop to this, to stop funding this war. As long as they continue to have the ability to loan, they call it loans, but in fact, this $90 billion thing is never going to get paid back, 90 billion euros. This is a fantasy. It's a grant. As long as Europe is continuing to spend tens of billions of euros on arming Ukrainians, particularly with drones, they can make this war go on for many years to come. And sooner or later, Russia will be forced to respond by attacking a European NATO country.
Hallo. Mitt spørsmål går til Glenn Diesen. Og jeg foretrekker å snakke norsk, siden jeg er norsk-svensk, men jeg er ikke nasjonalist. Vi vet jo hvem som driver kriger, hvem som starter kriger, og hvem som tjener på kriger. Det kan jeg si at jeg har jobbet både før, under og etter kriger har sluttet i 6 år. Hvorfor er det så vanskelig å få europeiske ledere til å slutte å kaste bensin på bålet når brandmenn bruker vann for å slukke? Hvorfor er det så vanskelig for dem å dra til Putin? Kanskje de er feige, redde. Og da er spørsmålet, hvorfor hvorfor klarer ikke opinion i Europa å presse lederne til å gjøre det for å få slutt på denne krigen der alle taper? Takk.
Yeah, so that's why European leaders will not make any, won't talk to Russia, won't make any peace, only escalate. It's a great question.
And why the opinion cannot push the politicians to make another way? Yeah.
Well, I think you do see some, the politicians, I think they're all work in locksteps, but you do see opposition emerging in other parts of Europe. Whatever one thinks of Germany or France or Britain, at least there you do see, as the popularity of the leaders are collapsing, you see a significant opposition emerging in Germany. It's emerging in France. It's emerging in Britain. You saw only last week, or was it 2 days ago, Bulgaria in the east, they announced they won't be sending in more weapons. They're pulling away from the proxy war. You see changes happening. Not here, though, in Scandinavia. There's no dissent really at all. I think still every member of parliament is for sending weapons. Not a single one is arguing for, maybe we should talk to the Russians. That would be a good idea. No, nothing. Why? I don't understand, because I can kind of understand every part in this conflict. That is, the Russians always, and we knew this since the 90s, they would consider it an existential threat if we ever reached, if NATO began to expand into Ukraine. this would mean war. I mean, Angela Merkel said this in 2008. Trying to pull Ukraine into NATO orbit would be considered a declaration of war by the Russians. The CIA director at that time said the same thing. So we know that the Russians consider this an existential threat. Ukrainians, I think they also, for very good reasons, consider this to be an existential threat. I can understand the Americans. They wanted to, as General Kellogg said, we can use the Ukrainians to knock out Russia. We can focus on the Chinese instead. When it didn't work, they're pulling away and handing it over to the Europeans. This makes sense, but I don't understand the Europeans. I have a very hard time. I don't understand. They're going to be living with this mess. It's a war they can't win. I always also ask, what would victory look like if you accept that you're fighting the world's largest nuclear power, who considers this to be a war for its existence? What would victory look like? So I don't understand. It's sadly my own territory, but I don't understand the European leaders much anymore.
It's possible that we need a psychologist to answer that question. For instance, Matthias Desmet, for instance, with his concept of mass formation, could go well into trying to get into the minds of our leaders. They seem to be acting irrationally.
Well, you would think you can ask, because if you can have an open debate, you can ask, why, what do you expect to achieve? What do you think the motivations of the Russians are? The problem is we don't, maybe I'm all wrong, but the fact is we don't even have debates in this country. I tried to do a debate, actually, as you remember, on the NRK with our former defense minister. And I thought I was going to argue why it's a good idea to do diplomacy instead of sending weapons, something that was our policy for decades in all corners of the world. And my response was, well, you just hope that Ukraine will be destroyed and Europe will live under threats for decades to come. That was the response. So there is no discussion. Like, you're a horrible person, you're a bad guy if you don't agree with the government.
There is no talking with these people.
Oh.
Yeah. This was a debate during our election campaign last year for the Partiet for, and it was the foreign minister, was it? No, it was former tidigare utrikesminister, the former, the woman with the Paul McCartney 60s haircut.
It's a good description.
That's in my mind. Anyway. We have a question up here now from this gentleman in the front row.
Thank you. First, thank you, both of you, for bringing sanity into internet. It's a pleasure every day to listen to you. Just a small first comment on Eisenhower and the warning about the military-industrial complex on the 17th of January, 1961, the same day as he killed Lumumba in Congo. I mean, the guy needs a broader picture. We have Mossadegh, and okay. Don't make him into a saint. I don't think you did, but if we pivot back to Israel-US relationship, could you open up that a little? Because it seems to me that Israel is not only interfering in US, or Canada, UK with Starmer, Epstein, South Africa, throughout the ages. I mean, you can call it Israel, you can call it Zionists, whatever. If you can call it big money that they control. Does Israel need a country? We see now that they're trying to buy up Romania. They move to Cyprus. Is this a kind of force that is? It just has a name now, Israel, but it can pop up anywhere.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that Israel is doing these things. I would say that there is an elite that is mostly made up of non-Jews, and most of whom I think don't particularly care about Zionism or finding a sanctuary for the Jewish people. They're similarly minded. Some of them are representatives of the Israeli government or work for Israeli intelligence services, but they have a lot of accomplices inside the U.S. government. So, for example, there was these revelations recently with the release of the JFK documents. There was this character, his name escapes me, who was in the CIA Angleton. Angleton was just a fanatical fascist. It was, so he wasn't working for Israel in my view. He had a certain hegemonic view of the world, a white supremacist view of the world, and Israel's agenda aligned with his own. And there are a lot of people like that in Western politics and in the economic elite. It isn't Zionism that drives them, it's power and wealth, and their agenda happens to align nicely with those of the leaders of Israel. And so they work together ultimately to achieve these objectives. So I think our real enemy is the billionaire class. To me, that's what it all comes down to. Inequality is the source of all the major injustices in the world. It's ultimately inequality.
Okay. It looks like this gentleman has the microphone, but then afterwards, Predrag, if you could give it to the gentleman with the blue shirt.
Yeah. My question is, we in FOR party promote this inclusive security for our shared future, which is really difficult now to grasp in this context. So how would you advise, I mean, you stood on front of our party on list, how would you advise us to promote and advance this inclusive security concept, which you talk about often on your podcast? How can we, because we're a very minority, trying to find peaceful coexistence? And what would be your advice how we could communicate this the best?
Well, I would say, use their own words or history against them, because none of these things used to be controversial. Throughout the Cold War, this was what the Helsinki Accords was about in 1975. That is, how does the East and the West, establish some common rules and learn to live with each other. This is when the basic concepts become of indivisible security, because kind of the point of departure in any international security issue is competition. That is, all states compete with each other for security. The idea that more weapons result in more peace, I mean, this has been discredited over and over again. If we can build all the missiles we want, the other side will do the exact same. So it shouldn't even be controversial. This is kind of recognized that the main challenge for peace is to find indivisible security. How do we enhance security for both sides? That was what the Helsinki Accords were about. And based on this is what made it possible for Gorbachev to push forward these reforms to essentially help to put an end to the Cold War, removing troops from the Warsaw Pact countries. And again, after the declared end to the Cold War in '89, we reached this agreement with the Russians, that is the Charter of Paris for a New Europe. In 1990, we established on the same principle indivisible security. So not bloc politics, not peace through strength, which is the new NATO slogan. It was indivisible security. One side should not enhance its security at the expense of the other side. Again, it was very uncontroversial. And in '94, we established OSCE. This is first actual inclusive security institutions, again, based on the same principles as from the Helsinki Accords and the Charter of Paris for a New Europe. And then we had essentially an inclusive European security architecture, which said no dividing lines in Europe and no more, and it should be based on indivisible security. But we already know what happened, because the U.S. Secretary of Defense under Clinton, Perry, he said it very clearly. Look, we decided this was not for us. We went for hegemony instead. What does hegemony look like? You expand NATO. This is the exact opposite. That means we'll enhance our security at the expense of the other side. We'll return to bloc politics. Instead of removing the dividing lines, we'll just gradually shift them towards the Russian borders. And so how would this work for security? Well, Perry said, well, of course, it will be a massive betrayal, but everyone thinks the Russians are weak, so we can do it anyways. So anyways, my point is, this concept of indivisible security, it was accepted by everyone, that this is the main approach we should have. And what I'm arguing is, this is the time to return to it. If we had the unipolar moment in the 90s, we thought, we can push all this aside, just do a hegemonic peace. Okay, I could have seen that argument in the 90s, but it's not possible anymore. So if Europe should have security, economic prosperity, and the relevance in the future, it can't have this militarized dividing lines, because it would make the Europeans too dependent on the Americans. The Russians will be excessively reliant on the Chinese. So, you know, it should be a no-brainer. But if you talk about indivisible security today, you hear some journalists call it a Kremlin talking point. I mean, we wanted to replace bloc politics with indivisible security. What happened to this? This was the foundation of all our agreements. No, so I would go back to history. This was our own objectives, and we replaced it because we have hegemony as a potential. Now that potential is gone, the logic then should be we go back to what was used to be Plan A. But there's not much debate in this country. You can't really argue in favor of anything. It's just, you know, either if you argue that, well, perhaps NATO undermines indivisible security because it's a military bloc, well, that's a Russian talking point. So you can't really get anywhere. So I'm not sure, but I would go back to indivisible security, because this is the key concept which we used to agree upon.
Okay, thank you, Glenn. We have time for one more question.
Yeah, I have a question, but you were all talking about the risk of Article 5 and going into a nuclear war if Russia goes and attack any of these European states that seems to be involved. But I follow you all on internet, and also Douglas MacGregor, and he is more thinking that Russia might now go harder in Ukraine. He has so far been sparing West Ukraine. He hasn't gone after the leadership, and instead of taking the risk of a nuclear or an Article 5 happening by attacking Estonia. So what if he should have the power to finish off the war if he wants to, just to erase Zelensky and his team in Western Ukraine? And wouldn't that force the other European countries to start the war, and instead of risking Article 5 by attacking Estonia, for example? They would then have to move into Ukraine to fight, or they would have to fight from their country and in that way declare war with Russia. And just one added question. Thanks to you all, we can see in Europe and even in the United States that the opinion is growing against the governments. In Europe, it seems like the government isn't representing a democracy anymore. Do you have any thoughts of what that has to say for the future when we look into the crystal ball? That it seems like we have leaders that will be standing alone. They will not have the people behind them in the future conflict.
With respect to the Ukraine war, it seems that, based on my read of the situation, that the Putin government is going to pursue the strategy in the near term that you just outlined, which is they're more likely to go after decision-making centers in the Ukrainian government, launch harsher attacks on the western part of the country, and maybe they have some other ideas that are confined to the territory of Ukraine. I think that that's going to fail, because I don't think the European leaders care about how many Ukrainians die, and I think they can always find somebody to replace Zelensky. You know, there's more than one Zelensky in Ukraine. So for sure, there are people waiting in the wings who are very corrupt and who will do what Washington wants them to do, as long as they're sufficiently compensated for it. The problem is that as long as you have the drone warfare and the flow of money, as long as that continues, this war can drag on for many years, even if there's a collapse of the front line. So I think eventually the Russian government is going to be obliged to punish at least one European NATO member and make an example of it to deter the flow of money and weaponry to Ukraine, unless the people take matters into their own hands in Europe. And, you know, this leads me to the second question, which is, you know, Europe has become profoundly anti-democratic. For me as a Greek, the writing was on the wall in 2015 when the Greeks elected Syriza, a radically left-wing party that it actually was at some point in time. And Tsipras, under great pressure from the European Union, the prime minister at the time, calls a referendum on austerity. And despite the threats of the European elite, Merkel and Wolfgang Schäuble and all the rest of these characters to expel Greece from the Eurozone and crash its economy, 63% of Greeks voted against the austerity package. What happens? Their prime minister imposes on Greece a set of austerity measures that were even worse than the ones that they had just rejected, under threat of expulsion from the EU. For me, European democracy died on that day. It died on that day, and it's just been on a downward spiral ever since. And now you have this ridiculous situation where you have people like Starmer and Macron and Merz with approval rating between 10 and 20%, and they just have no interest in giving up power. They're clinging to power. So I don't think I'm sorry to be pessimistic about electoral politics. I myself ran to be the leader of the Green Party of Canada in 2020. I gave it my best shot, and we almost won. But ever since then, I've become absolutely convinced that electoral politics is a mug's game, and that we need a revolution.
Thank you very much for your questions. We have to put a cap on it now. I just want to ask Dimitri, where can they find you? Those who have not found you yet, they're going to want to find you. Where do they go?
Thank you for asking. So the YouTube channel is called Reason to Resist, with the number 2 between reason and resist. And I'm also very active on X. My handle is @Dimitri Lascaris.
And Terry, they're asking where they can find this recording on this.
Oh, this recording?
Yeah, also this
Yes, we have recorded it, and that's a very good question. Len, were you going to put the recording of this up on your channel?
I could, yeah.
There you go.
I'm happy to do it too.
And you can. You're going to find it lots of places as soon as it's ready. Okay, because we have to. It'll be edited, and I will send a message somehow to everybody as to where the video will be available. So the reason we have to wrap up quite quickly, Glenn has been doing oral examinations at the university all day today. He has to do it tomorrow too, and he's got to get back home to get some rest before he does that. And Dimitri, this is why you have to go and see his latest upload on YouTube or on a Substack, The Flight from Nabatea. He told me a little bit about it, and we didn't have a chance to go into it tonight. But and I have not seen the video yet, but I highly recommend that when you go home tonight, that's the first thing you do. Have a look at that video of what happened just how many days ago?
2 days ago.
2 days ago. Mm-hmm. So Dimitri is tired. He's gotten out of Beirut, and thank God he's here and spent the time with us tonight. So I thank both you and Glenn for a great evening. Thank you so much for your participation. Please give them a hand. I also have to mention that I have organized this event on behalf of Lay Down Your Arms, whose board member and leading light is right here in the front row, John Y. Jones. And John there's another event coming up for Lay Down Your Arms on July 2nd, where John has invited John Kyriakou to come to Sagene Kirke on July
7 o'clock.
July 2nd, 7 o'clock, Sagene Cirka, if you want to meet and see John Kiriakou. If you don't know who John Kiriakou is, you should.
There's also going to be jazz music with Gustafsson.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you also to those who helped with some administrative things. The Peter Eisenstein on computer. I feel like I'm announcing the band members now. And on mics, that was Tala Brenna and Henning Ökland. And I also want to thank Fardin, who's in the audience tonight. He helped me put up posters with Tala a few days ago. Thank you to Augustine, who's the producent for Kulturhuset, and Josh, who took the video that you will see as soon as we get it up. That sounded strange. And and thank you to Nadia, who did a fantastic job on the sound. Thank you for coming, and have a great evening. Bye-bye.